Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Good to see you all. Welcome to this session. We'll be discussing issues of academic freedom in three countries, the Russian Federation, Poland, and Belarus. Just allow me to briefly introduce myself. My name is Michael Hall, and I work for the Eurasia Program of the Open Society Foundations in New York. The Eurasia Program is a grant-making program of Open Society Foundations that seeks to support initiatives mostly based in countries of the former Soviet Union that are in support of democratic governance, the rule of law, respect for human rights, transparency and accountability, and so on. And obviously, we feel strongly that the issue of academic freedom and the accompanying issues of the ability to think critically and engage in independent inquiry are essential to all of these elements. When I say that we make grants in the territory of the former Soviet Union, I should point out that this does not include any of the three countries represented on this panel for various reasons. Poland, for the very good reason that it is not, in fact, part of the former Soviet Union. Russia, because despite our having been in the country for a good 2 decades, we were at a certain point a couple of years ago informed that our presence there was no longer desirable, so we no longer operate any initiatives in Russia. Belarus, we simply have never had a presence in the country, again, for various reasons. So the question then arises, so what am I doing here on this panel? And that's a fair question, I'll concede. And I think the answer to it is that the issues that we see across the region, this includes the former Soviet Union, but not only, as the preceding session I think pointed out, we see these issues also spreading into countries of Central and Eastern Europe. Have a great deal in common, and the trends both are similar and parallel, but also very often mutually influence one another, so that what happens in one country can have consequences in neighboring countries. Now, having been here today and having had the opportunity to hear about the experiences of scholars and from places such as Turkey or Syria or Venezuela, the issues are quite different that we're talking about in this particular region. We're not seeing, at least not yet, the level of outright violence and severe repression, but the trend is nonetheless worrying. And I think the challenges that we see, both to academic freedom, but also to the independence and integrity of the educational sector at all levels, as I see it, are again, quite closely interconnected. And it's a combination of factors. It's a combination of somewhat older factors that have been around for a long time, and a lot of it has to do with the lack of autonomy of the education sector in many countries of the region. Very rigid and hierarchical and authoritarian governance, institutions of academic governance, the tendency by regimes in many countries of the region to look at universities and students and faculty as political resources, essentially, to be mobilized as needed. The entrenched corruption at all levels of the education system that one often encounters. These are things that have been there for a long time, and while may not constitute the same kinds of threats to academic freedom as we see elsewhere, nonetheless do present real challenges for the sector to be able to achieve its role of promoting critical thinking and indeed feeding into broader ideas of democracy and rule of law. A number of challenges are new in the region, however, and have emerged in the last few years. The very noted populist turn of Russia following the return to the presidency of Vladimir Putin, and the renewed emphasis on so-called foreign agents and so on, also has severe implications for the region and also within Russia itself, as the case of European University would indicate. The crackdown in Turkey also has its echoes in the region, where we see pressure being put on individuals and institutions that are in one way or another affiliated with the Gülenist movement in Turkey, especially in the Caucasus and Central Asia. So there are some new developments which are quite worrying. And in fact, one of the newest and worrying developments is, of course, the fact that Poland is now being included in this discussion at all. And the very hard right turn of the current government in Poland, while again it has not brought to it the level of I would say threats that we see elsewhere, nonetheless there's very troubling signs, such as the recent legislation criminalizing accusations of Poland's participating in the Holocaust, just to give one very clear and very disturbing example. So it's a combination of factors that make the picture quite complex. That said, there are some elements of hope here and there. The fact that many countries of the region are signatories to the Bologna process, which carries at least some commitment to reform is also a fact, and we see this can interact sometimes in interesting ways. I think the case of Belarus is one, where there's sort of very interesting interplay between authoritarianism on the one hand and reform on the other, at least nominal reform. Anyway, you're not here to hear me. So to talk about these issues, we have a great panel of three speakers representing the three countries here. We have Tatsiana Chulitskaya from the European Humanities University, Tatsiana Chulitskaya, I should say, Dr. Dmitry Dubrovskiy of the Center for Independent Social Research, and Professor Halina Grzymała-Moszczyńska from the Jagiellonian University in Krakow. So I think we're just going to follow the names as they appear on the program. I would just urge all speakers to keep things as short as possible, 5 to 7 minutes. We will be keeping track of time. And if we find you getting close to the upper limit, we'll let you know. So with that, then I will turn things over to Tatsiana.
Yeah, I can take it. Yeah, hello. So thank you for presentation. Yes, my name is Tatsiana Chulitskaya. I'm originally from Belarus, but now I'm working in Lithuania because of the history of my institution where I work at. So I work at European Humanities University. This is a university which was founded in Minsk, in Belarus, in 1992. And then in 2004, this university was forcefully closed because of the political reasons by Belarusian authorities. So we just have heard the story of Central European University, and I sincerely wish Central European University not to follow the path of going abroad, because it's true, when you go abroad from your home country, it's almost impossible to come back. So in 2006, EU relocated and re-established in Vilnius as Belarusian University in Exile, and it exists due to the broad international support, in particular European Commission support. Today we have around 90 students of BA and 900 students of BA and MA programs, and academic staff from Belarus, Russia, Poland, Lithuania, Ukraine, and other countries. So now I would just give you general context, political context of situation in Belarus, because I believe that it is essential for understanding what is going on in education policy and what is going on in the country itself. So if we speak about general political context of Belarus, we should say that there is the same president since 1994. It's Alexander Lukashenko. And he has been re-elected for several times with a huge percentage of support, around 80% every time. After almost all presidential elections, in particular in 2006 and 2010, there were mass protests after these elections, and a lot of students and a lot of people in general were on the street, but students and academicians in particular. So Belarus is still characterized by severe violations of political and civil rights, but of course, if we compare Belarus to Venezuela, there are no such harassments. But still, it's important to say that Belarus should be evaluated not as Venezuela, but it should be evaluated as a Central European country. And it's essential for understanding the situation with academic freedom in Belarus. So when it comes to international policy, we can see that Belarus is balancing between between Russia, and European Union. It's in its international politics. And since 2015, we can see a kind of liberalization of political situation in Belarus, and due to this internal liberalization, but I should note that it's not really liberalization, EU has lifted its sanctions from Belarus, and nowadays we observe intensification of contacts between EU and Belarusian government. So all this political situation create quite a dubious context for academic freedom in the country. So what is going on in education policy with students and universities in Belarus? Nowadays there are around 40 universities, and the percentage of population is around 5% of all population. So we have like 5% of population of all students. students of Belarus. So the Ministry of Education of the Republic of Belarus is still the main governmental body, and the whole political system is very centralized, and the Ministry of Education decides upon all the policies of all state-run universities, and almost all universities are state-run in Belarus. So public participation in higher education is almost missing, and level of autonomy of universities is around 25% of average for European higher education area. And universities are still tools for political education. For instance, we have these courses in state ideology, like in Soviet time, but it's kind of a modification of this ideology of scientific communism and something new. What is essential to say about Belarusian educational policy is that participation of Belarus in the European higher education area. As you might know, Belarus has joined European higher education area from the second attempt in 2015. So for the first time it failed actually to join European higher education area, but this exception of Belarus was conditional. So there is a special roadmap for Belarus which should be fulfilled in order to complete with all the requirements of European higher education area. And these conditions actually till 2018, I mean till this year. And what we observe now that just mostly technical steps are taken by Belarusian governments. So if we and other national and international independent experts analyze the completion of the roadmap, we can see that it has not been completed. And it's a big question now for European Union what to do with Belarus again. And agenda nowadays is try to extend this roadmap till 2020 under the international control. But this discussion will take place in Paris in several months, and there should be decision upon further participation of Belarus in European higher education area and Bologna process. When it comes to academic freedom in Belarus, we can say that there is intense state ideological pressure on academicians and students. The most typical violations of academic rights are dismissals of students and scholars who join, for instance, oppositional protests, some parties, or some non-governmental organizations. What is also important is forced membership in the state-backed pro-governmental organizations. For instance, there is a huge youth organization which is called Belarus, White Russia, White Rus, and students are forced to participate in it. And there is also a special non-governmental organizations for academicians. It's called Belarus, and you should be in organization if you want to be in a higher position in university. There are also restrictions on travel and mobility of academic staff and of students. For instance, if you want to go abroad for conference or for some internship program, you should get permission from the university's administration, but you should also get permission from the Ministry of Internal Affairs, which provide you with permission to go, and which should prove that it's not like human traffic, that you are going abroad because of your academic activities. There is also a very serious censorship and self-censorship in teaching and research. For instance, very few doctoral dissertations are defended in social sciences and in humanities, and especially in political science and history. It's really it's really difficult to develop contemporary harsh topics in these disciplines. But what is also important, there is a self-censorship between academicians when you yourself can decide that it's better not to take some topics on agenda, and it's better to work on some more neutral issues. And unfortunately, there are still cases of direct physical violence against students and academicians. And in the case when students and academicians participate in protests, it was a case in 2017. I mean, it was a case of the last year when there were huge social protests in Belarus, and there were some academicians and students, for instance, from my university, who were heavily beaten, then arrested, and then stayed for like 10-15 days in prison. I mean, it's not so much, but still, I mean, it's nothing good about it. So just to sum up, if we speak about academic freedom in Belarus, so it should be evaluated within the broader political context or even social economical context with its relations with Russia and European Union, but also it's essential to evaluate Belarus as within the European context. When it comes to repressions of the regime, of authoritarian regime in Belarus, we should say that there is a sophistication of these repressions. And what we see in academic sphere, for instance, if in previous years academicians and students, they were dismissed just after the protest, for instance, now their administration of universities, they are just waiting till either the end of the contract of academicians, and all academicians as a rule have short-term labor contracts, so you can imagine it will finish in a year or two, and then it just won't be prolonged. And for students, they just wait until the session, and then students just could not pass exams. And it's also, then they say that students do not complete with the academic requirements. And we should say that there is mostly hidden character of academic pressure in Belarus, and this hidden character, it creates a huge difficulties for us as monitors, as people who are involved in academic affairs, difficulties in verifications of violations of academic freedom in Belarus, because sometimes, especially from outside, it seems like everything is more or less okay, internationalization is more or less going on, students are more or less satisfied, and like everybody is more or less everything is more or less the same as it was like 15 years ago or 20 years ago. But unfortunately, the situation hasn't, I mean, it's really as bad as it was, and it is becoming worse because it's becoming more and more sophisticated, and it's very difficult for to make like clear conclusions on the character of suppression of academic freedom. Thank you.
Good day, thank you for coming, and I'm honored to be here and to speak about academic rights and freedoms. And first of all, I'm very thankful for Scholars at Risk and Scholars Rescue Fund, because I am in the way both an object of their support as well as a research scholar, because I lost my position at St. Petersburg State University 3 years ago and was supported by the Scholars Rescue Fund. Thank you very much, Emily, who is here, and Scholars at Risk. And I've spent 2 years in Columbia University at Harriman Institute teaching human rights in post-Soviet space. And now I'm working back in Russia as Associate Research Fellow in Center of Independent Social Research, and also Associate Professor at High School of Economics, Moscow. And this perspective is very nice to cut my presentation, because I just published a big article called Escape from the Freedom, the Russian Academic Community and the Problem of Academic Rights and Freedoms in Russia. It was published last year. And if somebody interested to go into details and deeply into the history of the situation and the Soviet legacy in the post-Soviet space, please let me know. I'll send you the article. But briefly, let me tell you what has been changed since the last time I've spoke about it in the Montreal conference and previously in Amsterdam about what's going on in Russian academic freedom. It could be called a Crimeanization of the higher education system. You know what? It is a very famous joke. What is the difference between the pessimist people and optimist people? So pessimist people always saying it's not possible to get worse, and optimists say no, it is possible. So that we are optimists in the way So before the 214th, I believe we are already close to the end of the real problems, but we are it was just the beginning. Well, what the situation we are living right now. So very briefly, I'll try to skip the most of the details, but there in general, first of all, there's serious pressure in the ideological sphere, and mostly on the political science and history. Because the political science and history now working again, mostly not as an analytical skill or but mostly ideological pressure for to providing for the very aggressive, for example, historical politics. So now we have the scholars who are under a real investigation, legal investigation for the publication, for example, the article about the Vlasa Farbi in Second World War. It was the collaborant army who collaborated with Nazis. This is the new situation with I would say the very questionable for me, the situation with forced collaboration between the leading Russian universities and the universities in occupied Donbass and annexed Crimea. Now we have a lot of situation when, for example, the Crimea students have a special quotas to apply for the Russian universities. The people from the Donbass, they are mostly have a very special condition to go to get the higher education in Russia. And that is, for me, as a former faculty of the St. Petersburg State University, is very difficult to accept the situation when the most of my former faculty members were actively collaborated with these people. I don't think it's the violation of law, but I truly believe it's the violation of the basic principles of academic solidarity. I do not believe that it's ethically acceptable to collaborate with such kind of university, at least right now. For example, there's a very, very particular example. The Russian archaeologists right now very openly participate in the archaeological excavation in Crimea without the permission of the special entities in Ukraine, because they have got such permission at the past, but now because of this excavation officially under the roof of the special bodies in the Russian government, they are applying for this permission. And the last news that every day I'm collecting the small news from my own university, from the universities of Russia. Just today, the special forces visited the director of the Human Rights Center of my former Smolny College within the St. Petersburg University, because she's French sociologist Karine Clément. She is accused and living not at the place she officially registered. But under these accusations, she might have either fine or deportation from the country, and she might lose her position now at the State University. And she is somehow related it with the previous conference, which was banned at the St. Petersburg State University, but conference was devoted to, official title was Nationalism and Patriotism. This conference was unexpectedly banned from the authority, although it was year-long conversation and to get this permission, and then they finally banned, and thanks God it was successfully relocated in a different place. And to sum up, the main problem is, I believe, is not even the direct pressure from the government, but the very active and still alive tools of the self-restriction and self-censorship. Absolutely the same way like it working in the Russian media, because Russian media mostly doesn't have the direct censorship direction. They are working in the situation as they very well, everybody understands what exactly the authority would like to see on the screen. So this is the censorship much more effective, because the institution which produced it never had been destroyed. So the same situation happened within the Russian Federation higher institutional system, We never crashed. And I believe this is the problem not only for the Russian Federation, it's for all the post-Soviet space. We never crashed the system which produced inequality, which produced oppression, which produced the authoritarian tendencies within the higher education. That's why we are so quickly go back to the total control from the state. And to the very end, currently, unfortunately, today we're discussing the situation with the Central European University at Budapest. But now, it is these days, very quietly dying the European University at St. Petersburg, which was closed, almost closed, because first of all, their license was revoked by the government, by the false accusation. Then the rent agreement was broke from the city government and they were pushed off from the building they are cared for almost 25 years. And now they lost yesterday, their last court, and now they are facing the situation. Well, they still alive. They could survive as a think tank, but they have no permission to teach the students, and they were, because I'm alumni of the European University of St. Petersburg, they were, and still is, one of the most independent, most successful, and most free university in the country, at least because of it was listed in the 100 best political science center in the world in 2007. So this is how the Russian government crashed the best universities in the country, which never have any serious challenge in political sense. So this is the situation right now. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for staying, and thank you for coming after lunch, which is always challenging. Okay, I'm going to follow 3 distinct points, hoping I will keep the time. The first of all is the point which pertains to upstream going rather than downstream going. By upstream going, I'm aiming in putting attention on the new regulation which is to be effective October 1st in Polish academia. This is a new act of introducing a very huge changes, and as far as we are speaking about important changes, I would say the changes which are going to happen. The first of all, it pertains to the Board of Academia, newly introduced body which is going to supervise selection of the candidates for rector. That's the one role, but not consisting from people from academia, but purposely from people outside academia. And the official explanation goes towards enhancing chance of academia on getting in touch with the social context. So the outside formed body should bring like the new, most relevant input from outside. But what does it really mean? First of all, they will produce list. Secondly, people from the academia will select from the list. And then this body is going to supervise performance of the rector on the yearly basis. Okay, you are getting the list of people to whom you can vote. Then you have a yearly report if this person is going to support or not support external expectations. And what's wrong with external expectations? Theoretically, you would say, okay, people coming from business is just fine. They are bringing new input. They are making university all more relevant. But in fact, it's very open to politics. It's very open to political party. I don't really imagine any party, no matter which political party will win, which will abstain from keeping close eye who is in the board and which performance is going to be introduced afterwards. That's the first thing in the academia. The second, which I'm considering equally important, which stimulates a lot of hesitation is a division between two categories of staff. The one which is the regular category of people who conduct research and who do teaching. And they, of course, need to produce relevant academic knowledge, have to conduct field research, etc. But there is according to my life experience, and I'm old enough to reflect on the long history of Poland, introducing someone who has special status being limited to teaching only is extremely dangerous. Because in the Polish history, we have infamous 68% situation, when many people who lost after being expelled from Poland, academic positions were open, and they were on the academia, they were filled with people who were good enough, trusted enough by Communist Party to fill the position. And what I'm fearing, that this special teaching track may be very open to those who will be exceptionally good, because that's how the act makes the statement, but how you will differentiate who is exceptionally good and who makes the criteria of being exceptionally good when the board of university comes from outside, it's very open to changes and to interpretations. So this is, I would say, is quite dangerous. When I was sharing this, my fear about developments with colleagues from Turkey, then I got a laugh, because they said, oh yes, we know the story of potato docent. And I'm very much afraid that we are entering on this dangerous track, making differentiation between fully fledged academics who produce knowledge acquired from the fieldwork and kind of the passive reproducers who do reproduce knowledge carefully selected according to outside expectation. That's as far as the Higher Education Act is concerned. Then coming about the independence of research. I would say that far we have no such an occurrence as the immediate political interference until March 15 this year. On the March 15 conference in the Museum of the History of Polish Jews, Polin has taken a conference entitled March 68, a reflection after 50 years. One of the papers presented by a social psychologist, colleague from Warsaw University, pertained to the pandemia, epidemic spread of the hate speech in the media. And this presentation created reaction from the member of the Senate, from the member of Polish Parliament, pertaining to two issues. The first of all, if really Polish Academic Council, Research Council, should subsidize this type of research, because this research are against best Polish interests. Of course, it immediately has stirred a lot of reaction among psychologists, among university professors through all the countries. We've been signing petitions, we've been signing protests, but nevertheless, this was occurrence like, shall we really touch upon the most important current issues, or we rather silence them? And then the third thing, which I like to put your attention, is more complicated. I would like to speak about racist crimes in Poland. If you look on the statistics provided by police, there is a rise of the racist crimes. But as the psychologist who is observing methodological rules in reasoning, I have to say one needs to be very careful. Because first of all, if you have rising numbers, it might mean different things. The first of all, more people report such a crimes. B, more often police acknowledges this sort of crime as the racist crime. Thirdly, the people in the police are better educated to understand what they are. Thirdly, and finally, we can also say that just the numbers don't tell much about proportion, how many more foreigners we have in Poland, which means how big percent of people undergo such experiences comparing to a couple of years ago. So I would say I would remain careful with making a blind statement. There is a sharp increase of racist crimes. I could say, as a teacher who teaches international students in both Krakow University and Warsaw University, I do notice cases. But is there any statistical, really valid source which can confirm cases are proportionally more frequent or not? I don't think at this moment we can confirm. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all very, very much for your presentations, and also thank you for keeping things as brief as possible. I mean, I'm struck by a number of things, but really what comes through, again, is sort of the more subtle, the more kind of insidious ways that academic freedom is affected, right? Whether it's by, rule by law. We had the conversation in the previous session about the difference between rule of law and rule by law, where these sort of restrictions or laws are put in that on the face of it seem fine. No, we're just asking for some greater transparency or whatever, but actually have very serious consequences. And I think this is the case in many of these instances. Or the issue of self-censorship, of this sort of ingrained fear of trying to step outside where the red lines are. And that this doesn't even require a very heavy-handed kind of aggressive censorship, but just simply relying on people to know their place. Or, again, the experience of European university, it's not like, they're not bulldozers coming down and take down the building. It's, oh, well, sorry, you have, your contract has expired, your agreement has expired, there's this, there's that. So it's ways that are almost subtle, but also very insidious. And I guess the question then that I would have to all three of you, okay, so what to do? I mean, if it's not the case that there are these sort of very kind of open and direct, although this has happened, as the case of Belarus shows, that there are these very direct cases of crackdowns, what to do about these more sort of subtle, more sort of insidious ways, especially in the case of three countries that for various reasons seem to be pretty impervious to outside pressure. And I'm just wondering, so what are the opportunities, especially for an organization such as Scholars at Risk or other organizations that have similar mandates? What do we do? So maybe, okay, Dima, if you want to take the first. I saw
that. First of all, I believe the provisions of the devoted to the academic rights and freedoms of particular universities should be a part of any international agreements on the collaboration between the different universities. Because now we are really suffering sitting within the country in the situation when for example, rectors, for example, my former rector, who is the former teacher of the two presidents, I mean Medvedev and Putin, because they are lawyers, you don't believe me. He is visiting different countries as a prominent scholar, and he is always been accepted as a rector of one of the biggest and prominent university. And nobody cares, and nobody even touched this issue in the conversation with him. So again, I'm not speaking we should organize boycott or something, but to include the provisions about the violations of human rights, violation of academic rights in the particular universities, the international universities supposed to collaborate with, that will be very important for the scholars who are living with. So that was one of the proposal I have.
Yeah, it's a very difficult question. Of course, the most essential is to have like internal changes within Belarusian academy or Russian academy, but it's really difficult way, and we do not have good answers here. But when it comes to international pressure, international support, here we can speak about all general advocacy tools. I mean, like letter of support, letters of concerns about situation with academic freedom in the country. There should be also this cooperation of international organizations, for instance, human rights organizations with Belarusian national ones. There should be also I think what is essential, support of individual cases of academicians who got fired, for instance, from university, and of students who is dispelled from universities. But here is also, it's a dubious situation, because sometimes, and we actually had the situation in Belarus when Poland has opened a special program, it's called Kalinowski program for Belarusian students, and Belarusian students who were expelled from Belarusian universities, they got possibility to go and to study in Poland, and then they have never come back. I mean, 80% of them have never come back. The same story, not the same story, but it's also a big concern for our university, because our graduates, 60% of them are going back to Belarus, so it's more than a half. It's a good point anyway, but still this brain drain is going on. But on the other hand, when you are a fired academician, you should somehow survive at least for a year or two after you fired from Belarusian university. And here we definitely need support from Western universities with such individual cases, especially taking into consideration that our academicians sometimes, unfortunately, according to Western academia, they're not so well qualified, and sometimes some overqualification is needed, or overtraining is needed, and so on and so forth.
As I said, the upstream reaction could really prevent downstream bad results. So I would say, since this act, which I was quoted, is coming into effect on the October 1st, I think it will be extremely beneficial if the international community will keep a close eye on the developments. How does it going to really operate? Who's coming into membership in the boards? How many and with what qualification? Political parties, religious bodies? Who is entering? Who is nominated? Because that's what will have enormous long-term impact. And secondly, also, on the European scale, there are organizations which supervise teaching. And having accreditation means to meet certain criteria against making very clear that teaching quality will not be compromised, no matter is that a professor whose position is based on research, or is there a new person whose position is only based on exceptional good teaching, make a clear criteria what this is going to be, who's going to verify, and what external measures can be used in order to prevent unnecessarily bad developments. So I would say a care ahead of time.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much. We have about 15 minutes left in the session, and I do want to be sure that there is time for at least some questions. So here's what I'll do. I'll take, I think, a round of 3 questions. Just 2 things. If you could, when you're asking a question, if you could first identify yourself, but secondly, try to keep the question as short and to the point as possible. Again, just in the interest of time. So I think I'll take a first round of 3, just based on the order that I see them. Okay.
Board, or is it politicians that are sent into the board from the government, or who else decides about this?
Okay. Another question, just to gather these. Yes.
Hi, thank you all for the presentations. My name is Liz Sheptelnikova with American Councils for International Education Field Office in Ukraine, and my question is also actually to Halina, so I hope we won't overwhelm you way too much, but I'm quite curious what the discussion and the engagement on the changes to the Higher Education Act look inside of the Polish academia. Do you feel there are opportunities for academics and university leadership, as well as maybe student representatives, to speak out and propose amendments to the acts, or at least, you know, keep a closer look on the issues that you feel are can become a concern, or has there been a lack of communication from the governmental side? So yeah, if you could elaborate on that, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, great. And one more question. Yes.
I'm sorry, Elena is going to have to give us a half an hour lecture. I did, sorry, I'm afraid that the question is also for you. I wondered if you could also, for people that are not aware, perhaps put this kind of act in context of the other types of, because in what we've seen over the last 2 years in Poland is the creation of an act which creates an advisory body, which is used for political purposes. And whether it's the creation of the new media council or the way in which the judiciary has been, gone through state capture, that the idea that there's an act coming out that is going to begin to designate who can be the rectors of the universities seems like it could be, in fact, the beginning of a larger crackdown on the university, which for now hasn't been the main target, it seems, of the government.
Okay, so thank you very much. So 3 questions, all to you, Halina, which I think are very interrelated. So just sum up: who is deciding on the composition of these boards? What has been the participation in the process of this legislation, of the development of these new decrees? And then something about the context. What do you see this? How do you see this fitting with other trends in Poland, and what might it augur for the future?
Well, if I'm asked who should be represented in the board, I would say people who have no vested political interests in, which means they represent who do not represent a political position which they like enforce into functioning of the university, but do have represent a high competence. I can easily imagine Polish scholars who are so numerous in so many institutions all over the world, often taking dean's position, provost position, to be invited into such a boards, bringing outside competence, lifelong experience to invigorate academia in Poland. I'm not saying making this board is bad by definition. What I'm fearing, this is kind of the position of enormous influence.
Who's making these decisions? Who's actually deciding who gets on this board?
It's right at this moment, it's very open. Like these boards will be structured, and there is plenty of denial of any political intention behind. But I would say general statements like the politicians will be represented, business will be represented. I don't want either to have become university kind of the back office of the developing the businesses. It's not for what university is about. So I would say we have people of Polish origin who have contributions proven by their life, and they should be invited in such a board. That's kind of the dream structure. Then how this act of higher education has been created. To be fair, I have to admit, discussions over this document took almost a year. Different groups of scholars have been invited for the conferences. However, since I was witnessing a conference which was introducing this act as the final version, I can quote our minister, Govin, who just said, and the conference was taking place on Monday. He said, well, on Friday, it was slightly different version, but today is Monday, and I have new insights, and what I'm going to present to you is my new insight from Monday, which really says, that's a quote from the real occurrence which has happened in Krakow in September this year, which I'm saying, of course, discussions were all over. One cannot deny the fact. However, how much of this discussion came into final version, that's another story. And and this is how it is. And now the relation between the general political context and these changes of the academia, in the academia. I would say how it looks now, I would say it goes more or less the same direction, but I wouldn't be fair if I say it started already to go in the moment of inception. And also, since this act is not going to be proceed through the parliament, it's going to be introduced as the regulation. I think there is a limited chance of some changes, improvements, and if not a change in this procedure under which is going to be brought into existence. So I would say we are really in the intermediate moment in the developments, and I don't think anybody, and I'm using this word consciously, anybody can predict how this will develop, because also inside of the ruling party, there is plenty of disagreement and plenty of heated discussion based on personal lack of love between certain members of the leading position.
All right, thank you very much. I think we have time for one more round of questions. So I'll take another group of 3. Yep.
My name is Rai Safiev from University of Bergen, Norway. I'm quite familiar with the situation in Belarus and also Russia. And then Tatsiana mentioned that there is a change since 2015. And this change is that the state is lost its revenues, which it actually got from Russia. And nowadays, the state maybe isn't able to finance its institutions. So under these circumstances, so we have, I think the choice of the dictator would be leaving those institutions to function and to finance themselves. So like find their self-financing. So do you think there is I can guess that there could be change in that, there could be a new trend that in Belarus, at least some universities try to find extra finances from abroad, or try to at least increase their ranking, international ranking, to be popular.
I would like to make an additional comment on what Tatsiana reported on the European higher education area. Exactly 1 month from now in Paris there will be a ministerial conference. This is happening every 2-3 years, and it's an update on the situation in Europe. It means they will be discussing the conditions that were put for Belarus. Will they consider it to be fulfilled? Then Belarus will remain a full member of the community, and if not, it won't. The interesting thing is that there are 2 competing topics in that meeting. One is academic freedom. So for the first time in many years, academic freedom will be one of the targets of that meeting. So we will be speaking on it, we will be discussing it, and ministers will have to make a statement on it. But it's competing with another thing. This is happening in Paris. And the Paris president has this plan of creating new European universities. And he wants this to be a big show of the future of higher education. And he has no interest in any trouble on academic freedom. So it is very important for each and every one of us, based in European countries, to be in touch with your own ministry and make certain that they will speak out on this matter of academic freedom, because this is a beautiful chance to have that on the European Forum.
Great, thanks, for a very, very helpful and practical suggestion. One more question, I think, then I'll turn things back over, I guess, to, so far to Tatsiana.
Thank you. I'm Beata Kowalska from Jagiellonian University from Poland, and I have one comment. Please remember discussing about our new reform about political content, political context, especially in my country, because I'm afraid that a lot of topics could disappear from academic agenda. So definitely I'm thinking about my topic, gender studies and feminist studies, because if we look at the list of scholars at risk in Europe, you can notice that there are a lot of people who are interested in feminist critics. And in a few months, a lot of our journals won't be recognized by our ministry. I don't mention about grants because during last year we have had a lot of problems with grants for our research. So please remember that some areas of research could disappear.
Okay, great, thank you. Tatsiana.
Thank you for your question about this westernization of Belarusian situation. I should say that we must be very conscious and very careful claiming that Belarus is going west now and it's out of Russian influence, because it is not. What Belarus is really doing is balancing between Russia and European Union, and you can never know when this liberalization is finished, because it was a situation of 2008, 2009 till the elections of 2010, when there was a liberalization. Belarus has become a part of Eastern Partnership program, and it looked very promising. I mean, it was like really like academic freedom were better, political freedoms were better, and so on and so forth. But then it was collapsed after presidential elections. So what is going on now? I believe that this liberalization and westernization could be finished any moment. So I wouldn't say that it's just one direction nowadays. But what is also important, and here I agree with you, that while now there are less money from Russia because Russia is suffering from its internal economic crisis, Belarusian government doesn't have such big funding for universities or for social sphere at all. There is really this task for universities and research centers to make their international cooperation profitable. So, for instance, there is a huge wave of encouraging of universities administration to participate in Horizons 2020, to participate in some other European supported projects. But the main goal here is that it should be profitable. It shouldn't be just for cooperation for the sake of cooperation, or of getting new knowledge, or science diplomacy, for God's sake. It should be just profitable. And that is the most important issue for Belarusian government nowadays. So be conscious about it. And here, thank you for your comment. I just do not have time to reflect on the situation with Bologna process. But of course, there would be huge discussion, and it's really very essential for all the national governments of Western states, but also for separate Western universities to be precise and to make point on Belarusian situation when they make, for instance, treaties or agreements on cooperation with Belarusian universities, that academic freedom should be on agenda, because otherwise Belarusian universities are just following the formal obligations and do not do anything else, and they just keep academic freedom out of their agenda. Thank you.
Thanks very much, and also thank you for also, I think that brings us also back to Dima's comment about the need to keep academic freedom on the agenda. Okay, we are just at the end of our session, so thank you all to the presenters. Thank you to all of you who joined us. Yeah. Thank you.